All right, so I have another title that may sound like it's negative, but this is not to spread negativity. This is just my version or my attempt to do some constructive criticism all across the board. Now, by the end of this video, I'm not trying to point fingers at anybody. If just, feels like if you have a discussion like this, you have to be able to reference where you're having things come from. And so the way the Division 2's PvP has actually turned out to be, it's turned out to be unsatisfactory for a number of reasons, but it's really almost hard to actually nail down what reasons there are because a lot of people have multiple reasons. But I've also stayed away from speaking about PvP because I've kind of left it for, the PvP community, but it just seems like all across the board, nothing seems to be satisfactory. And I've been trying to trace down where all of this has come from, and I think I know exactly what it is. You see, a lot of the content creators initially put out their dissatisfactory Dark Zone videos, and I listened to them, especially the people who have played for much long in this community. I will mention no names. And what I intended to actually pull out from there was the underlying reason, and I figured it out. The underlying reason is the Division 2's PvP is the opposite of the Division 1's PvP, and it was not just a mistake, it was a deliberate design to be everything that a Division 1's PvP is not. And this fundamentally is why the PvP community in the Division 2, or even people who try to PvP, most of the time cannot see reason for the PvP. What's actually important and what's actually very funny is those who are new to the Division 2, they go into the PvP and are not necessarily shocked by some of the things in the PvP. They actually think it's okay because they don't understand or know how the Division 1's PvP used to be. And so let's start from a reference point. So first of all, when the game was announced and the PvP was announced, the developers made some kind of a statement saying that they didn't want any toxicity in their game because the Division 1's PvP was apparently, in their opinion, quite toxic. And if you look around and go on the Division YouTubes, you're going to see that a lot of the Dark Zone interaction was actually toxic behavior. Now, whatever you want to say, oh, I'm acting like some kind of softie, that's just what it is. When it comes to brand management and brand perception, you don't want your brand, a multi-million-dollar brand, to be affected by childish behavior, because that's exactly what it is. People cussing people on the internet, keyboard warriors acting like they're tough guys and all that stuff. That's a whole bunch of childishness. Now, it's fun to watch the drama unfold, I'm not gonna lie. It's also much more fun to laugh at all these things going on, and that's why a lot of people profited from it. They actually made videos of themselves cussing people out, maybe even making, in some cases, racist comments outrightly and being put on the internet. And the developers and I guess even maybe the PR team out there massive looked and said, this is not what we want associated with our game, so how are we going to curb it? Remove the VoIP. They removed the whole thing, and the community said, well, we're grown-ups and we're adults and yada yada yada. Whatever. They made the decision as an exact opposing reaction to how the community handled the Division 1. Now, when they were building the Division 1 and were going to create a Dark Zone which allowed for this kind of chaos, I guess that they did not intend to see something like this happen. Maybe they didn't know what human behavior would be like, and then they went ahead and put it there and they were like, ah, crap. The unintended consequences were right there before them, and their brand was something that was actually seething this very nonsense type behavior from a whole bunch of people. And that's the way things are. You put a bunch of people with egos in a community, in a space, usually those things will start to rub against one another. I remember going in the Dark Zone and people would shoot me and just, take out my player and cuss me out, even when I didn't even instigate anything. I'm a PvE player. I'm not a shooter kind of guy when it comes to competition. You can play me in fighting games and sports games. And I always wondered, what is so special about this person with some kind of digital weaponry thinking that they're a hard person? Some of us don't understand that aspect of the game. And that's how, many of us decided we're not going to go into the PvP side, which leads me into the second part, which is a lot of players playing the Division 2 are not interested in PvP. So I have a friend that we played the Division together, and he didn't play the Division 1 very long. He played only the story mode, but he's really a big fan of Division 2 and he wants to go PvP. But what he notices is when he goes into the dark zone and tries to shoot other players, they just don't engage. They go to another server or they go to another checkpoint. Or in some cases, in one very funny case, he said, I joined this group, we matchmade, and I went rogue and somebody just left the group immediately. Some people are just not interested in PvP, period. And a lot of those people make up a good chunk of the community, so it's just the way it is. You have the lot of people who just say, the Division 2 does not seem competitive in a sense. It's more like a lot of cheesy type, aspects of the game that allow for people to win in PvP. Some people play PvP without using cheesy builds and they do very well. I'm not taking that away from them, but that is just where some aspects of the community actually feel. And some people on the PvP side don't understand this and they say, so what do you want to do all day? Shoot NPCs and, get a better build to do what? Nothing. To just get a better build. That is the aspect of a lot of the game, and so people stick with that. And then if you look again, another thing that the developers did, which I definitely think was a direct opposition to how they designed the first Dark Zone, was they took the Dark Zone concept and split the Dark Zone into 3 different remote areas and scattered it on the far ends of the map. If you look at the way the Dark Zone actually is, to me, it's actually funny. The Dark Zone that followed the lore of the Division 1 was one quarantined area based on specific, story points in the main game. But then the Dark Zone that you have in the Division 2 seems like a skew and a deliberate attempt to tear apart that interaction or anything that made for that toxic type interaction to happen. And then they made them smaller, they made the player count smaller, and that's what we've been served in this Division 2 game. Now, that doesn't affect me, but it is definitely a core reason why a lot of people do not want to interact with the Division 2's Dark Zone, because you remove all of the ability for somebody to run all the way around and around and around and take the whole server for a spin. Back then, 4-man groups would take an entire server for a spin and make sure that people are crying by the end of the session. But now it is actually much more difficult. Even though, yes, you might get in your multi-kills, you're probably going to be shot and downed. Which then leads me into the normalization, which is another thing that the developers have actually implemented as a direct opposite to the first Division game. Now, normalization is supposed to make your gear actually be on par with everybody's gear based on what you're rocking or whatever. Some kind of, crazy math has been done to make me, who just takes my random gear into the Dark Zone, to be competitive with somebody else. And this, I think, was as a result of a lot of players, maybe a lot of casual players, not feeling satisfied with the Dark Zone experience that they paid for, and going into the Dark Zone and people having better builds, having better skill than they did, eventually wiping the floor with them, and then they, threw up their arms and maybe went to some forums and complained, and then the developers were like, you know what, we need to make the game probably much more appealing to everybody else. In that aspect, using a normalization system seemed to make some sense, and so the developers implemented that so that the skill gap will be drastically brought together and closed up. And so now you have randomly, almost anybody can shoot almost anybody and take them down regardless of how fine-tuned their build is. Back in the Division 1, the extra 5, 6, 7%, the extra 5, 6, 7 seconds that you could stay alive, the extra 5 more or whatever, metric your build had better than somebody else could determine the difference between you winning that fight almost 100% of the time. In a Division 2, that is not necessarily the case. I remember farming in a Dark Zone and some people rolled up on us, and I had my big damage to elite build and my LMG, and I shot them and they went down, and I said to myself, this is crazy. I don't think that's ever happened to me in the whole Division history, period. I mean, for me to just turn my weapon and just shoot somebody and then they go down, which is absolutely crazy. Back in the Division 1, there were all kinds of measures to mitigate damage. You could use your survival link, you could use your tactical link. A lot of those things were very much, fun aspects of the game. But if you look at the Division 2, the skill tree is boring. They removed a lot of the overpowered skills and are now, by the 5th update finally trying to make skills viable, which from testing done by some of the Division content creators in the Dark Zone, skills look that they will be out of hand in a sense, which I look forward to seeing that in PvP. And so this is one area, and I feel like these are some of the reasons why you have a Dark Zone that is not satisfactory to the Division's PvP community. How the developers can change this Dark Zone experience is probably by implementing old systems into the Dark Zone, which I very much and I highly doubt that the developers are interested in doing. And sure, that will probably be very offensive because a lot of people will say, you know, we bought this game in order to experience the PvP aspect of the game. Fine and dandy, but to be very honest, the game has been built and its fundamental systems are actually there. And if you look at even the way the developers have taken PvP and put it on the back burner, I don't know why their reaction is that way. All I can do is maybe speculate and say perhaps the data does not show that a lot of players are engaging or were engaging in the PvP from the Division 1. And people may say, oh, but the PvP in the Division 1 kept the game alive. No one has the data for that except the developer. So I don't believe that. When people say the PvP in the Division 1 kept the game alive, I don't believe it. Fine, it was all the YouTube videos that were there, sure, but how do you know that a lot more players were not doing PvE at that same point? Because PvE is not something that is always the best part of getting views, if you understand what I mean. And so when we look at it, you have to think and say, well, a lot of the reasons we see the Dark Zone from the Division 2 the way it is as a result of how interactions from players and even design decisions from development teams or the development team at Massive has influenced and affected the Division 2. So what you have right now is a watered down, bland version of an interactive area for player versus player gameplay. And so that's what I think has happened. So if you're a PvP player, you're disappointed, I'm sorry to say that's just the nature of the beast. I'm not saying Massive is right for making those decisions. I'm not saying that players were wrong for interacting the way that they did, which many of them were wrong. I'm not saying that, you know, some of them are blameless. Some of the PvP players absolutely sowed the seeds to reap this reward of a Division 2 PvP that we have right now. That is definitely for sure. Some people have blame to take, but in that instance, at that time, it was all fun and games, but here we are. The PvP community is voicing their concerns and they seem like they're falling on deaf ears. So this is just my opinion. This is what I think has happened over the course of the whole PvP transition from Division 1 to Division 2. Now, I want to hear what you guys think. My entire premise may be off, may be wrong, but I think on whatever it is, the developers seem to have made the decision from their design development, and so you can't really argue with that. And look at the way you can point to correlations as to why things like the size of the Dark Zone, the VoIP, the normalization, these things have all been, I would say, as a result of how the Division 1 Dark Zone interactions were, and probably the data and maybe the design decisions that they wanted to make. I'm gonna get out of your hair. Thank you very much for listening. If you made it to the end, leave comments, let me know what you guys think, and I guess I'll see you in the next video. Peace.